I watched as Judge Reynolds's face changed. His eyes widened slightly as he scanned the yellowed document my mother-in-law had kept hidden all these years. The courtroom seemed to freeze. "Well, Mrs. Bailey," he said, looking directly at me over his reading glasses, "it appears your claim to the Oakwood property is—" He paused, clearing his throat. That's when I knew. All the money I'd spent on lawyers, all the stories I'd spread about Martha being senile, all the family ties I'd severed, it was all crumbling before my eyes. The floor seemed to shift beneath me. I opened my mouth to protest, but no sound came out. How could I have been so wrong? How could I have become this person? I remember running my fingers over the for sale sign in front of that magnificent Victorian house on Oakwood Avenue just 5 years earlier. The real estate agent, Diane, had warned me and my husband James that the place needed extensive repairs. "It's a fixer-upper, but with good bones," she said, clicking her pen nervously. "The owner is willing to sell below market value because she's moving into assisted living." We walked through those creaking floors, past the peeling wallpaper and outdated fixtures, but all I could see was potential. 3 stories of pure potential. The wraparound porch that would host summer gatherings, the spacious bedrooms for the children we planned to have, the garden where I'd finally plant those heirloom tomatoes. I squeezed James's hand and whispered, "This is it. This is our forever home." We made an offer that same day. What we didn't know then was that we weren't just buying a house. We were inheriting a complicated family drama. Martha Jensen, the owner, was James's estranged grandmother. He hadn't seen her since he was 8 years old, when his mother had some falling out with her that he never fully understood. I only discovered the connection when we met Martha at the closing. The moment James said his full name, James Bailey Jensen, her face went pale. "You're Caroline's boy?" she'd asked, her voice barely above a whisper. James nodded, confused. Martha looked between us, her eyes filling with tears. "I never thought," she started, then stopped herself. "Well, isn't life full of surprises?" She signed the papers with a shaking hand, and just like that, the house was ours. She left us her phone number, said she'd be moving to Sunshine Meadows Assisted Living just 20 minutes away. "If you find anything that might be important," she'd said cryptically, "old papers or photos, you'll let me know, won't you?" I nodded politely, but was too excited about our new home to really listen. The first year in that house was magic, despite the challenges. We replaced the plumbing, updated the electrical, and stripped away decades of wallpaper to reveal beautiful oak paneling underneath. James and I would collapse, exhausted each night, covered in plaster dust, but so filled with purpose. We'd talk about our future. Children running up and down the grand staircase, about growing old on that wraparound porch. We invited Martha over a few times, thinking it might be nice for her to see the improvements. She came once, moving slowly with her walker, touching the banister and door frames like they were old friends. She kept asking if we'd found any papers in the house. "What kind of papers are you looking for, Martha?" I'd asked. She just smiled vaguely and said, "Oh, just old family things. Nothing important." Really, but I caught her trying to open a locked drawer in the study when she thought no one was looking. Then came the call that changed everything. It was a Tuesday evening in October, the kind where the setting sun turns everything golden. James had been working late at the architectural firm, and I was alone painting the dining room. The phone rang, and it was Sunshine Meadows. Martha had fallen. Nothing broken, but they were keeping her for observation. "She's been asking for James," the nurse said. "She seems quite agitated about some papers." I promised we'd visit the next day. When I told James that night, he seemed distracted, worried. "She keeps talking about these papers," he said. "I wonder what she's looking for." I shrugged it off. "Probably just some old photos or letters. You know how sentimental elderly people get." If I could go back to that moment, I'd slap myself for my dismissive attitude. I'd make myself listen. Because the papers Martha was so desperate to find, they would have saved us all so much pain. We visited Martha the next day. Her room at Sunshine Meadows was small but cheerful, with a window overlooking a garden. She seemed smaller somehow, frailer than I remembered. When she saw James, her face lit up. "You look so much like your grandfather," she said, patting his hand. Then she leaned forward urgently. "Did you find anything in the house?" "In the study, behind the loose brick in the fireplace." James and I exchanged looks. We hadn't even known there was a loose brick. We'll check when we get home, James promised. Martha nodded, sinking back into her pillows. You must find it, she whispered, before it's too late. On the drive home, James was quiet. What do you think she's talking about? I asked. He shook his head. No idea. Mom never talked about her mother much. Just said they had different values. When we got home, we went straight to the study and found the loose brick Martha had mentioned. Behind it was nothing, just dust and cobwebs. Maybe she moved the papers somewhere else before selling, James suggested. Or maybe she's confused. I nodded, but something felt off. Martha had been so certain. 2 weeks later, Martha had another fall. This time, it was serious. Broken hip. The doctors said she'd need surgery, followed by extensive rehabilitation. She keeps asking about James, the nurse told me over the phone, and something about papers. She seems very distressed. I promised we'd come right away. At the hospital, Martha looked tiny in the large bed, tubes and monitors everywhere. When she saw us, she tried to sit up, wincing in pain. Did you find them? She asked immediately. James took her hand. Find what, Grandma? What's in these papers that's so important? Martha's eyes darted around the room, as if checking for eavesdroppers. The truth, she whispered dramatically. About the house, about your mother, about everything. Then a nurse came in to administer medication, and Martha drifted off to sleep before she could explain further. In the hallway, the doctor told us Martha's prognosis was guarded, medical speak for not good. The combination of her age and the severity of the fracture made recovery uncertain. You should prepare yourselves, he said kindly, and perhaps get her affairs in order. That was the moment something shifted in me, something ugly. I remember standing in that antiseptic hospital hallway, fluorescent lights humming overhead, thinking about the house, our house, that we'd poured thousands of dollars and countless hours into renovating. The house that was supposed to be our forever home, where our children would grow up. What if there was something in those mysterious papers that could threaten our ownership? What if Martha had some legal claim she'd never disclosed? I didn't share these thoughts with James. Instead, I suggested we look more thoroughly for the papers when we got home. We should know what she's so worried about, I said, trying to sound concerned rather than suspicious. James agreed, his face etched with genuine worry for his grandmother. I felt a twinge of shame at my own selfish thoughts, but I pushed it aside. After all, we had invested everything in that house, everything. We searched the entire house that night, checking behind every loose brick, looking under floorboards, tapping walls for hollow spaces. We found nothing. The next day, I called the real estate agent who had handled the sale. Did Martha Jensen leave anything with you? I asked. Any papers or documents she might be looking for now? Diane sounded surprised by the question. No, nothing like that. But, she hesitated. There was something odd about that sale. Martha was in a huge rush to close, even though the timing wasn't great for her move to assisted living. She kept saying she needed to complete the sale before they found out. I assumed she meant her family, that maybe they wouldn't approve of her selling for below market value. That conversation left me with more questions than answers. Who were they? And what weren't they supposed to find out? I didn't tell James about this conversation. Instead, I started my own investigation. I'll tell you now what I didn't want to admit then. I was becoming obsessed. While James visited Martha daily at the hospital, I was digging through county records, property deeds, and Martha's personal history. I told myself I was just being thorough, protecting our investment. But there was something else driving me, a creeping suspicion that the sweet old lady act was just that, an act. I hired a private investigator, paying $2,500 from our savings without telling James. Find me anything unusual about Martha Jensen or the property at 1847 Oakwood Avenue, I instructed. When James asked where I was going each day, I said I was checking on contractors for the next phase of renovations. The first lie of many. I still remember the smell of old books and dust in the county records office, the flickering fluorescent lights, the suspicious looks from the clerk as I requested file after file. What was I looking for? I didn't even know. But I was sure I would recognize it when I saw it. 3 days after her surgery, Martha took a turn for the worse. Pneumonia, the silent killer of the elderly. James was devastated. He spent every possible moment at her bedside, reading to her, showing her pictures of our renovations on his phone, trying to lift her spirits. I went too, of course, but my mind was elsewhere. I kept studying her face, looking for signs of deception. Was she really as frail as she appeared? Or was she playing us, biding her time until she could reclaim the house we'd poured our lives into? One afternoon, while James stepped out to take a call, Martha's eyes suddenly focused on me with surprising clarity. "You don't trust me," she said simply. It wasn't a question. I started to deny it, but she waved me off. "The papers," she whispered. "James needs to know. Promise me you'll tell him when you find them." Before I could respond, she drifted back to sleep. I sat there, heart pounding. What did she know? What did she think I would do? The private investigator called me the next day. "I found something interesting," he said. "Martha Jensen wasn't always Martha Jensen. She changed her name in 1962, from Martha Kowalski. This was unexpected." "Any reason why?" I asked. "Can't say for sure," he replied, "but it was right after she married Robert Jensen. Could have just been taking his name in an official capacity. But here's the interesting part. Robert Jensen's family owned quite a bit of property in your area, including parcels that eventually became your street." I felt a chill. "The house?" I asked. "Was the house part of the Jensen property?" There was a pause. "That's where it gets complicated," he said. "I'm still untangling the property lines and transfers. I'll need another week and another $1,000. I transferred the money immediately. James questioned the withdrawal from our joint account, and I told him it was for a surprise. Another lie. The web was growing. Martha died on a Thursday morning. James got the call while we were having breakfast. I watched his face crumple, watched him set down his coffee mug with shaking hands. "She's gone," he said simply, tears streaming down his face. I held him as he sobbed, feeling a complex mix of emotions, genuine sadness for his loss, but also a shameful relief. With Martha gone, whatever secrets she'd been keeping might die with her. But I was wrong. So very wrong. The day after Martha died, her lawyer contacted us. She left specific instructions. Mr. Greenberg explained over the phone. "There's to be no funeral. Her body is being donated to medical research, as per her wishes." And she left letters for both of you. James and I went to Mr. Greenberg's office that afternoon. He handed us each an envelope. James's was thick, stuffed with what looked like multiple pages. Mine contained a single sheet of paper. I opened it when we got to the car, looked behind the loose baseboard in the master bedroom closet. It read, "Tell James everything." No signature, no explanation. Just those two sentences that made my blood run cold. I didn't tell James about the note. Instead, I waited until he fell into exhausted sleep that night, still clutching his own unopened letter from Martha. Then I crept to the master bedroom closet and found the loose baseboard she'd described. Behind it was a small metal box, locked. I took it to the bathroom, closed the door, and picked the simple lock with a hairpin, a skill from my less than perfect youth that I'd never told James about. Inside the box was a single document, a deed to the house, dated 1932. But the name on the deed wasn't Jensen, it was Kowalski, Martha's maiden name. There were notations on the deed indicating it had been transferred multiple times, with the final transfer in 1962 to Martha and Robert Jensen. Something wasn't adding up. If Martha and Robert rightfully owned the house, why all the secrecy? Why was she so desperate for us to find these papers? Unless the transfers hadn't been legitimate. Unless there was someone else with a claim to the property. I carefully replaced everything exactly as I'd found it, my mind racing. I needed to know more before I told James anything. The next morning, James finally opened his letter from Martha. I watched his face as he read, trying to gauge what she might have told him. He looked confused, then shocked, then deeply sad. "She's been keeping a secret her whole life," he said finally, looking up at me. "About my mother." He handed me the letter. It was a detailed account of a family rift that had occurred decades ago. Martha's daughter, James's mother Carolyn, had fallen in love with a man Martha and Robert disapproved of. There had been arguments, ultimatums. Caroline had run away with this man, James's father, and Martha and Robert had disowned her. Years later, when Caroline tried to reconcile, bringing 8-year-old James to meet his grandparents, Martha had been too proud, too stubborn to forgive. Robert had wanted to, but Martha refused. She regretted it every day since, especially after Carolyn and her husband died in that car accident when James was in college. Martha had tried to find James afterward, but didn't know how to reach him. Then, by some cosmic coincidence, he had walked into her house with me, looking to buy it. She saw it as a sign, a chance to make things right. The letter explained all this, but said nothing about the deed I'd found, nothing about the house's ownership or any potential dispute. It was purely a personal account, a deathbed confession of regret. James was emotional but oddly relieved. "At least I know now," he said. "At least I understand why Mom never talked about her parents." I nodded sympathetically, but inside I was calculating, what if there was more to the story? What if the deed I'd found was only part of the picture? I suggested James take the day off work to process everything. Once he left to go for a walk, I went back to the loose baseboard and retrieved the box again. This time, I examined the deed more carefully. There was a name I hadn't noticed before, listed as a co-owner, with the Kowalskis in the original deed, Sullivan. I didn't recognize it from any of my research. Was this the missing piece? I photographed the document and carefully replaced it, then called the private investigator again. "Sullivan," he said thoughtfully when I told him what I'd found. "Yes, that tracks with what I've been discovering. The Sullivans and Kowalskis jointly purchased several properties in the area in the 1930s. But here's where it gets interesting. There was a legal dispute in the early 1960s. The Sullivan family claimed they'd been cheated out of their ownership. The case was dismissed due to lack of evidence, but I could hear him shuffling papers. There's a note here that the Sullivans believed key documents had been hidden or destroyed. They continued to assert their claim informally for years afterward. My heart was pounding now. "Are there any Sullivans still around?" I asked. "Any descendants who might still claim ownership?" There was a pause. "I'll need to dig deeper on that," he said. "But names can change, especially over generations. Could be anyone." After I hung up, I sat on the edge of our bed, staring at the beautiful hardwood floors we'd refinished ourselves, the custom moldings we'd installed, the bay window where I'd imagined rocking our future babies. The thought of losing this house was unbearable, and in that moment, I made a decision that would change everything. I decided not to tell James about the deed or the Sullivans, not yet, not until I knew exactly what we were dealing with. I told myself I was protecting him, sparing him additional grief while he was mourning Martha, but the truth was, I was protecting myself and our claim to the house. Over the next few weeks, I dove deeper into my investigation. I took time off work, claiming I needed to finalize some house projects. I spent hours at the county records office, tracing property transfers, looking for loopholes or irregularities. I became a regular at the Historical Society, poring over old newspapers for mentions of the Sullivans or Kowalskis. I hired another investigator to find any living Sullivan descendants. I was spending thousands, $4,750 by my careful accounting, all hidden from James. When he asked about the dwindling savings, I blamed unexpected renovation costs. The guilt was constant, but so was the fear of losing everything we'd worked for. Then, 6 weeks after Martha's death, I found what I was looking for, or rather, what I was dreading. An obituary from 1985 mentioned Ellen Sullivan Peterson, who never abandoned her family's fight for justice regarding the disputed Oakwood Avenue properties. The article listed her survivors, including a daughter, Margaret Peterson Walsh. A quick search revealed that Margaret was still alive, aged 72, living just 30 miles away in Riverside. I sat in my car outside the records office, hands shaking as I contemplated what to do. The right thing would be to contact this woman, to hear her side of the story, to find out if there was any legitimate claim that needed to be addressed. But I didn't want to do the right thing. I wanted to protect our home. So instead, I drove to visit Mr. Greenberg, Martha's lawyer. I needed to know if he was aware of any dispute over the property, any potential claim that could threaten our ownership. Mr. Greenberg's office was in an old converted Victorian, not unlike our own home, with creaking floors and stained glass transoms. He seemed surprised to see me without an appointment, but agreed to speak with me briefly. "Mrs. Jensen never mentioned any dispute over the property," he said when I carefully asked about the house's history. "The title search before your purchase came back clean." I hesitated, then decided to show my hand. "I found a deed," I said, showing him the photo on my phone. It shows the property was originally owned by Kowalskis and Sullivans. Do you know anything about that? His expression changed subtly, a slight narrowing of the eyes, a tightening around the mouth. Where did you find this? He asked. I lied, saying it had been mixed in with the papers Martha had left for James. Mr. Greenberg studied the image for a long moment, then sighed. This is before my time with Mrs. Jensen, he said finally. But if you're concerned, you should consult your own real estate attorney. His tone was professional, but dismissive. As I left, I couldn't shake the feeling he knew more than he was saying. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Margaret Peterson Walsh, the Sullivan descendant, living just 30 miles away. Did she know about the house? Was she planning to come forward with a claim? Or was this all ancient history, a dispute long forgotten by everyone except Martha? I lay beside James, listening to his steady breathing, watching the moonlight create patterns on our bedroom ceiling, and made another decision I would come to regret. I would find Margaret Peterson Walsh. I would assess the threat she posed, and I would do whatever was necessary to protect our home. The next morning, I told James I needed to visit my sister in Chicago for a few days. Another lie. Instead, I drove to Riverside, checked into a small motel, and began surveillance on Margaret Peterson Walsh. I told myself I was being thorough, careful. Looking back, I can see I was becoming unhinged. Margaret's house was a modest ranch-style home with well-tended gardens and a small American flag by the door. I parked down the street, watching as an elderly woman, presumably Margaret, came and went, walking a small dog, chatting with neighbors, living her ordinary life. After 2 days of this, I realized how ridiculous I was being. This was a harmless old woman. What was I doing spying on her from my car, like some deranged stalker? I was about to leave, to go home and come clean to James about everything, when I saw something that froze me in place. A man arrived at Margaret's house, tall, in his 40s, wearing a suit. He carried a briefcase, a lawyer. He stayed for over 2 hours. When he left, I followed him. He drove directly to the county records office, the same one where I'd been conducting my research. This couldn't be coincidence. Margaret Walsh was looking into the property records, which meant she knew something, which meant our home might really be at risk. I abandoned all pretense of rationality then. I followed the man who turned out to be Margaret's son, attorney William Walsh, back to his office. I waited until his secretary stepped away, then approached his desk with a story about needing urgent legal advice. Up close, I could see the family resemblance to the photographs I'd found of the Sullivans, the same straight nose, the same cleft chin. He was suspicious of my unscheduled arrival but agreed to speak with me briefly. I need to know about property disputes, I said, trying to sound casual. Specifically, historical claims that might affect current ownership. He raised an eyebrow. That's rather specific. Do you have a particular property in mind? I hesitated, then took the plunge. 1847 Oakwood Avenue. The change in his expression was immediate and unmistakable. Recognition, surprise, and something else. Calculation. That address is familiar, he said carefully. May I ask your interest in it? I claimed to be a potential buyer, concerned about rumors I'd heard. He didn't believe me, I could tell. But he also didn't show his full hand. Any property with a complex history should be thoroughly researched before purchase, he said vaguely. I'd be happy to help with that for a fee. I thanked him and left, my heart racing. He knew the Sullivans were still interested in the house, our house. I'll tell you exactly what happened next, though it shames me to this day. Instead of going home to James, instead of coming clean and facing this potential threat together, I drove straight to another lawyer, one I found online, specializing in real estate disputes. I paid a $5,000 retainer with my personal credit card and laid out everything I knew about the Sullivan claim. I was strategic in what I shared, emphasizing the decades that had passed, the clean title search before our purchase, our good faith renovations and improvements. The lawyer, Dennis Hoffman, listened carefully, taking notes. Possession is 9/10 of the law, he said finally, and adverse possession laws are on your side given the time frame. But, he paused, tapping his pen against his legal pad. If there was fraud involved in the original transfer from Sullivan's to Kowalski's, and if they can prove it with documentation, things could get complicated. He recommended a preemptive legal strategy, filing paperwork to further solidify our claim. potentially even a quiet title action to proactively address any competing claims. It would cost another $10,000 minimum. I agreed immediately. When I finally returned home, James was worried sick. I'd been largely unreachable during my sister visit, making excuses about poor cell reception. "What's going on with you?" he asked directly. "You're not yourself lately." For a moment, I considered telling him everything: the deed, the Sullivans, my investigation, the lawyers. But then I looked around at our beautiful home, at the life we'd built, and I couldn't do it. "I'm just stressed about work," I lied, and still processing everything with Martha. He seemed to accept this, though not entirely convinced. That night, as we sat on our porch swing, watching fireflies in the garden we'd planted together, James mentioned something that made my blood run cold. "I had a strange call today," he said casually. "Someone named Walsh, asking about the house. Said he was doing historical research on the neighborhood. Asked a lot of questions about how we came to buy it from my grandmother." I kept my expression neutral with effort. "What did you tell him?" I asked, trying to sound merely curious. James shrugged. "Just the basics. That we found it through a realtor. Didn't know it was my grandmother's until the closing." He seemed particularly interested in whether we'd found any old documents or papers in the house. I nodded, mind racing. The Walshes were closing in. I needed to act faster. The next day, I called Dennis Hoffman with a new urgency. "They're making contact," I told him. "They're asking questions." He advised, accelerating our legal strategy. "We need to file the quiet title action immediately," he said. "And I recommend a more aggressive approach. Investigate the Walshes, find any vulnerabilities in their potential claim." "It's not pretty, but it's effective," I agreed, authorizing him to hire investigators to dig into the Walsh family's background, to find anything that might discredit them or their claim. The cost was mounting, another $7,500. I was using credit cards now, opening new accounts in my name only. James and I had always shared everything. Financial, had always made decisions together. Now I was operating in secret, spending thousands we didn't have, all to fight a battle he didn't even know existed. The weight of the deception was crushing, but I convinced myself it was necessary, that I was protecting us, protecting our home, protecting our future. 2 weeks later, Mr. Hoffman called with news. "We've found something interesting," he said. "William Walsh has financial problems, significant debt, possible gambling issues. Mother's house, Margaret's Place, has a reverse mortgage with very little equity left. They're vulnerable." I knew what he was suggesting without him having to spell it out. A financial offer, a settlement before any formal claim was even made. "How much?" I asked. $50,000, he replied. "Cash, confidential agreement, full release of any claims." "It's a bargain considering the value of your property and the costs of extended litigation. $50,000. We didn't have it, not without selling investments meant for our future children's education. Not without taking a second mortgage on the house itself. But the alternative, losing the house entirely, was unthinkable." "Do it," I said, my voice sounding strange even to my own ears. "Make the offer." That night, I looked at my reflection in the bathroom mirror and barely recognized the person staring back at me. When had I become this person? When had protecting our home become worth any cost, any deception? I wish I could say that was my moment of clarity, that I came to my senses and confessed everything to James, but I didn't. Instead, I doubled down. While Mr. Hoffman worked on the settlement offer, I decided to confront Margaret Walsh directly. I needed to see for myself what kind of threat she really posed. I drove to Riverside again, parked outside her house, and waited until I saw her working in her front garden. Then I approached, heart pounding. "Mrs. Walsh," I said, "my name is Rebecca Bailey. I believe we have something to discuss about 1847 Oakwood Avenue." She straightened slowly, arthritis evident in her movements, and studied me with sharp blue eyes that belied her age. "I've been wondering when someone would come," she said calmly. "Would you like some iced tea? This conversation has been 80 years in the making. No sense having it on the sidewalk." I followed her inside, wondering what I'd gotten myself into. Margaret Walsh's living room was filled with family photos and heirlooms, including, I noticed with a shock, a framed black and white photograph of my house, the original Victorian, before any renovations or updates, probably from the 1940s or 50s. She noticed me staring at it, Beautiful, isn't it? She said, pouring tea into delicate cups. My mother used to describe every room in detail, though she herself only visited once, as a child. It became almost mythical in our family stories, the house that was stolen from us. I sat stiffly on her floral couch. Stolen is a strong word, I said carefully. The property has changed hands legally multiple times since then. Margaret smiled sadly. Legal doesn't always mean right, does it? She replied. Did you know that my grandfather Joseph Sullivan and Martha's father Stefan Kowalski were business partners, friends, that they purchased that house and several other properties together during the Depression, when prices were low? I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. What you probably don't know, she continued, is that when Joseph died unexpectedly in 1962, Stefan took advantage of the confusion to transfer the properties solely to his daughter's name, Martha. He forged documents, backdated papers. My grandmother tried to fight it, but without the original partnership agreement, which had mysteriously disappeared, she couldn't prove anything. The courts sided with the Kowalskis. I listened, trying to maintain a neutral expression, but inside I was reeling. If what she was saying was true, if Martha had knowingly lived in and then sold us a house with a fraudulent deed. But Margaret wasn't finished. My mother spent years trying to find that partnership agreement. She was convinced Martha had hidden it somewhere in the house. When my mother died, she made me promise to continue the search, to reclaim our family's legacy. She sipped her tea calmly. And now, it seems, Martha's grandson owns the house. Life has a strange way of coming full circle, doesn't it? Set down my untouched tea. What exactly are you hoping to achieve, Mrs. Walsh? I asked directly. She smiled. Justice, of course. Recognition of the wrong done to my family. And yes, compensation for what was taken from us. I stood to leave, my mind made up. This woman, with her calm certainty and decades-old grievance, was indeed a threat. Mr. Hoffman's settlement offer was the right move. I'll have my lawyer contact your son, I said stiffly. Margaret nodded unsurprised. She said, as I reached the door, Martha tried to make it right at the end. Did you know that? I froze. What do you mean? She sighed. She contacted William about 6 months ago, said she wanted to confess, to return what rightfully belonged to us. But then she fell, and then, she shrugged. Well, here we are instead. I drove home in a daze, Margaret's words echoing in my head. Martha had tried to make it right. The papers she'd been so desperate for us to find, they must have been the original partnership agreement, the proof of the Sullivans' claim. She'd hidden it for decades, lived with the guilt, and finally, at the end of her life, had wanted to confess. But she'd fallen before she could tell us where to find it. Or had she? She'd mentioned the loose brick in the fireplace, the loose baseboard in the closet. She'd left me that cryptic note. Look behind the loose baseboard in the master bedroom closet. Tell James everything. I'd found the deed there, but nothing else. No partnership agreement. Unless there was another hiding place I'd missed. I needed to search again, thoroughly, systematically. Before the Walshes could make their move, before Mr. Hoffman's settlement offer complicated things further. When I got home, James was waiting for me, his face grave. Where have you been? He asked quietly. Before I could formulate another lie, he continued. I got a call from American Express today, about a new card I apparently opened, with a $15,000 balance already. My stomach dropped. In my distraction, I'd had a statement sent to our home address, instead of setting up electronic-only communications. I can explain, I started, but he cut me off. I also got a call from Dennis Hoffman's office, confirming our appointment tomorrow. Funny thing is, I've never heard of Dennis Hoffman. He was angry, hurt, confused. I'd never seen him look at me that way before. Who is he, Rebecca? What's going on? And don't lie to me again. I've had enough lies. In that moment, looking at my husband's face, I realized how far I'd strayed from the person I thought I was, from the partnership we'd built. I took a deep breath and told him everything. The deed I'd found, the Sullivan connection, my investigation, the lawyers, the money spent, my meeting with Margaret, everything. By the time I finished, tears were streaming down my face. I was just trying to protect our home, I whispered. James's expression was unreadable. Our home, he repeated. Flatly, you did all this, lied, spent thousands without telling me, spied on an elderly woman, to protect a building. When he put it that way, it sounded so shallow, so materialistic. But it wasn't just a building to me. It's our future, I insisted. Everything we've worked for. James stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the garden we'd planted together. My grandmother's letter explained more than I told you, he said finally. She wrote about a terrible thing she'd done as a young woman, helping her father cheat his business partner out of his share of several properties, including this one. She carried that guilt her entire life. He turned back to face me. She said she'd hidden proof of the original ownership in the house, and that when I found it, I would have a choice to make: continue the deception or make things right. My heart was pounding. Did she say where she hid it? I asked. James nodded slowly. Yes, and I found it yesterday. I've been waiting for you to come clean, to see if you would tell me the truth without prompting. He walked to the bookshelf and pulled out a thick family Bible I'd never paid much attention to. From between its pages, he withdrew a yellowed document, the partnership agreement, dated 1931, clearly showing Joseph Sullivan and Stefan Kowalski as equal partners in several properties, including 1847 Oakwood Avenue. The Bible was hidden in a compartment under the window seat in the attic, he explained. Right where she said it would be. I stared at the document, the proof that could undermine our claim to the house, the validation of everything Margaret Walsh had told me. What are you going to do with it? I asked, my voice barely audible. James sighed heavily. The right thing, Rebecca. I'm going to do the right thing. He took his phone from his pocket. I already called William Walsh. He's coming over tomorrow morning with his mother. We're going to discuss a fair resolution. I felt like the floor was falling away beneath me, without consulting me, without even talking to our lawyer first. My voice rose in panic. James, they could take everything we've worked for. He looked at me then with such disappointment that I physically flinched. Is that all you care about? He asked quietly. The house, the things. What about doing what's right? What about who we are as people? I had no answer, because in that moment, I realized how far I'd fallen from the person I thought I was, the person James believed he'd married. That night, we slept in separate rooms for the first time in our marriage. I lay awake in the guest bedroom, surrounded by the custom curtains I'd sewn, staring at the ceiling medallion we'd restored together, listening to the familiar creaks of our house settling for the night. Our house, but was it really ours? Had it ever been? And even if it legally had been, did we deserve it, knowing it had been acquired through fraud and deception? I thought about Margaret Walsh, living in her modest home with the reverse mortgage, holding on to the hope of justice for 80 years. I thought about Martha, carrying the burden of her guilt, trying to make things right at the end of her life. I thought about James, unwavering in his commitment to doing the right thing, even at great personal cost. And then I thought about myself, the lies, the sneaking around, the money spent, all to protect a possession. Who had I become? When had a house become more important than my integrity, my marriage, my very sense of self? Sometime before dawn, I made my decision. I would support whatever James thought was right. I would face the consequences of both Martha's actions and my own. If that meant losing the house, so be it. We would rebuild somewhere else, both our home and our marriage. The meeting the next morning was tense but civil. Margaret and William Walsh sat across from us at our dining room table, the one James and I had refinished together during that first magical year. William had brought documents, evidence of the forged transfers, of Stefan Kowalski's manipulation of records after Joseph Sullivan's death. James presented the partnership agreement he'd found in the family Bible. Margaret wept when she saw it, touching her grandfather's signature with trembling fingers. My mother always said it existed, she whispered. No one believed her. We discussed options, possibilities. The house was now worth considerably more than when we'd purchased it, thanks to the renovations and the rising market. A complete surrender of ownership would leave us with nothing to show for our investment of money, time, and love. But keeping it, knowing its history, felt wrong too. In the end, James proposed a solution that seemed fair to everyone. We would sell the house and split the proceeds equally with the Walsh family, acknowledging their rightful half-ownership. Given the current market value and the equity we'd built, we'd still walk away with enough to start over elsewhere. Not a fortune, but enough. The Walshes agreed immediately. Over coffee, after the formal discussion, Margaret showed us old family photos, including one of Joseph Sullivan and Stefan Kowalski standing proudly, in front of the newly purchased house in 1932. They were friends before they were business partners, she explained. The depression hit them both hard, but together they managed to buy several properties at rock bottom prices. They had such plans. She shook her head sadly. When my grandfather died, something changed in Stefan's grief. Maybe, or just opportunity. He convinced Martha to help him alter the records, to claim full ownership. Martha was young, newly married to Robert Jensen. She went along with it, probably not fully understanding what she was doing. William added that Martha had reached out to him shortly before her fall, expressing her desire to confess and make restitution. She seemed to think it was fated somehow that James ended up buying the house, he said, like the universe was giving her a chance to correct her mistake. As they spoke, I felt the weight of my own actions pressing down on me. I'd been so quick to villainize them, to see them as threats, when all they'd wanted was recognition of a historical wrong. After the Walshes left, James and I sat in silence on the porch swing. I'm sorry, I finally said, for everything, the lies, the money, the scheming. I was so afraid of losing this place that I lost myself instead. He took my hand, squeezed it gently. We both got caught up in it, he said. I fell in love with this house too, made it the center of all our plans. But it's just a house, Becca, just wood and plaster and glass. I looked at him, tears in my eyes. But it's our home, I whispered. He shook his head. No, we're our home. Wherever we are together, that's home. He was right, of course. I'd confused the physical structure with what it represented: our future, our dreams, our partnership. But those things weren't contained in the walls, or the floors, or the garden. They lived in us, in our commitment to each other, in the values we shared, or were supposed to share. I'd forgotten that, let myself become someone I didn't recognize, someone who would lie and scheme and spend thousands to protect a possession. I want to be better than this, I said quietly. I want to be the person you thought you married. James smiled sadly. You are that person. You just got lost for a while. We both did. The legal process took time, of course. There were papers to file, agreements to draft, a house to prepare for sale. We found a small apartment nearby to rent temporarily, while we figured out our next steps. Packing up the house was emotional. Each item a memory, each room a collection of moments we'd shared. I found myself lingering in the garden, touching the rose bushes we'd planted, memorizing the pattern of sunlight through the old oak tree. James found me there one evening, tears streaming down my face as I said goodbye to the dreams we'd attached to this place. We'll have another garden, he promised, holding me close. Another porch for summer evenings. Another place to build memories. I nodded, wanting to believe him. But something had broken in me, some certainty about the future, about my own character. If I could become that person, the one who lied and schemed and justified it all, what else might I be capable of? Who was I, really? The day of the closing arrived all too soon. We met the Walshes at Mr. Hoffman's office, the lawyer I'd hired now, representing all of us in the complex settlement. The buyers, a young couple with 2 small children, had no idea of the property's complicated history. They saw only the beautiful Victorian with the wraparound porch, the spacious bedrooms, the garden ready for summer vegetables, just as we had 5 years earlier. I watched their faces as they signed the papers, saw their excitement, their dreams for the future visible in their eyes. Did they sense the weight of the house's past, the deceptions and regrets that had seeped into its very foundation? Probably not. To them, it was just a beautiful old house with good bones. I thought about warning them, about sharing some of what we'd learned about becoming too attached to a physical structure, about the dangers of making a house the repository of all your hopes. But in the end, I said, nothing. Some lessons can only be learned through experience. After the closing, the 4 of us, James and I, Margaret and William, went for lunch at a nearby cafe. An unusual foursome, bound together by a house and a history none of us had created but all of us had inherited. What will you do now? Margaret asked us as we finished our meals. I looked at James, uncertain. We'd been so focused on resolving the immediate situation that we hadn't really made concrete plans for the future. Travel, maybe, James said. Take some time to figure out what we really want, where we want to be. I nodded in agreement. The settlement had left us with enough money to take a break, to reassess. And you? I asked Margaret. She smiled, her face brightening. William's helping me move to a retirement community next month. A nice one, with gardens and activities. I've been putting it off because of the expense. But now, she gestured, indicating our settlement. Now I can afford it. And I can help my grandchildren with college tuition. I felt an unexpected surge of joy at this news. At least something good had come from all of this. As we said our goodbyes in the parking lot, Margaret took my hands in hers. I want you to know, she said quietly, that I don't blame you for trying to protect your home. I understand that drive all too well. It's what kept 3 generations of my family pursuing this case. Her eyes, still sharp and blue at 72, met mine directly. But I've learned that justice and peace aren't always the same thing. Sometimes you have to choose. She squeezed my hands, then released them. I think we all made the right choice in the end. I nodded, unable to speak through the lump in my throat. As they drove away, I realized that Margaret Walsh, who had every reason to see me as an adversary, had shown me more grace and understanding than I'd shown myself. Maybe that was the first step toward redemption, accepting that grace, letting it show me a path forward. That night, in our rented apartment with its beige walls and generic fixtures, surrounded by boxers of our lives, James and I talked openly for the first time in months, really talked, without the shadow of the house hanging over us. I keep thinking about what would have happened if I'd just told you everything from the beginning, I said. If I'd shared what I found instead of going down that rabbit hole alone. James considered this. I probably would have wanted to contact the Walshes immediately, he admitted, to understand their side, to see if there was a fair resolution. He paused. That might have been hard for you to accept then. He was right at the beginning. I'd been so certain of our right to the house, so invested in protecting our claim, that I might have fought him on that. I got so fixated on the idea that the house was our future that I couldn't see any other possibility. I said, I couldn't imagine being happy anywhere else. James took my hand, and now, I looked around at our temporary home, at the man who had stood by me despite my deceptions, who had chosen integrity over comfort. Now I know better, I replied. Home isn't a place, it's a choice we make every day. 6 months later, we found ourselves on the coast of Maine, in a small cottage overlooking the Atlantic. We'd decided to rent for a year, to experience different places before committing to another purchase. The cottage was nothing like our Victorian small, rustic, with windows that stuck and a roof that leaked during heavy rains, but it had a garden where I'd planted herbs and flowers, a porch where we drank coffee and watched the sunrise, walls that held our photographs and memories. It wasn't perfect, but neither were we. I was still working to rebuild James's trust, still catching myself in moments of materialistic thinking, still learning to separate my sense of security from physical possessions. Some days were harder than others, but we were moving forward together. We talked about starting a family again, about putting down roots somewhere, not necessarily Maine, but somewhere that felt right for who we were becoming, not who we'd been. I received an unexpected package in the mail one day, a small, carefully wrapped parcel from Margaret Walsh. Inside was the framed photograph of our Victorian that I'd noticed in her living room, the one from the 1940s or 50s. With it was a note. This belongs with you now. The house has a complicated history, but it brought us all together in the end. That's worth remembering. I hung it in our cottage's small living room, not as a reminder of what we'd lost, but as a testament to what we'd learned. James and I would sometimes look at it and talk about the rooms we'd renovated, the garden we'd planted, the dreams we'd built within those walls. But we'd also talk about Martha and her decades of guilt, about Margaret and her family's quest for justice, about our own mistakes and growth. The house had been more than a structure. It had been a crucible, burning away our illusions and leaving behind something stronger, something truer. I sometimes wonder about the young family living there now. Are they happy in those rooms where we once planned our future? Have they found any remaining secrets hidden in the walls or floors? Do they feel the weight of the house's history, or are they blissfully creating their own story, untouched by the past? I hope it's the latter. I hope they love it without becoming possessed by it, enjoy it without making it the center of their identity. Because that's the lesson I learned. Standing in that courtroom as Judge Reynolds read the original partnership agreement, as the floor seemed to shift beneath me, As my voice failed and my certainty crumbled, a house is just a house. Beautiful, valuable, full of memories, but still just wood and glass and stone. It's the people who matter, the choices we make, the person we decide to be when tested. If you're listening to this and you recognize yourself in my story, if you're holding too tightly to a place or a thing, if you're letting it define you, if you're compromising who you are to protect what you have, pause for a moment, take a breath, ask yourself what truly matters, because I can tell you from experience, no house, no possession, is worth losing yourself for. Trust me on this one. I had to learn it the hard way. And if you know someone who might be facing a similar test, someone whose sense of security or identity is too wrapped up in a place or a thing, share my story with them. Sometimes we need to see ourselves through someone else's mistakes to recognize our own path. As for me, James and I eventually settled in a small town in Vermont, in a modest home with a garden that blooms spectacularly in the spring and a porch where we rock our twin daughters to sleep on summer evenings. It's not a grand Victorian with a wraparound porch and 3 stories of history, but it's ours, truly ours, built on honesty and perspective and hard-won wisdom. And when I look around at these walls that shelter us, this roof that protects us, these windows that let in light and air, I feel something I never felt in that beautiful house on Oakwood Avenue. Despite all our renovations and investments, I feel at home. Real home. The kind that exists within you, that you carry wherever you go, that no deed or document or dispute can ever take away, that's worth more than any house, no matter how many stories it has, no matter how grand its porch, no matter how deep its history. Trust me on that. I know exactly what I'm talking about. If you've stayed with me through this whole story, thank you for listening. I'd love to know what you think. What would you have done in my place? Would you have gone to any lengths to protect your dream home? Or would you have done the right thing from the beginning? Leave a comment below. Subscribe if you want to hear more stories like this one, and hit that like button if this resonated with you. I'm recording this from my little home office in Vermont, with the sound of my daughters playing in the next room, a reminder of what really matters. Until next time, take care of yourselves. And remember that home isn't a place, it's a feeling, a choice, a truth you carry within you.